Hi, everyone. Shane Stevenson here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And for today's video in 29 and 29, I hope you're actually enjoying them, even though we're still pretty early in the process. So I'm sitting in our talk today, and I'm going to be talking about why a service year is important to a museum ship's interpretation. All right, so you'll see me go right down that rabbit hole. Don't need to introduce much more than that. So let's go. Okay, why is a service year important to a museum ship interpretation? So a little background here. Interpretation is a way of connecting an historic object to a museum ship visitor, or just a museum in general. Within a historic object, there is historic heritage, right? So an historic object is made up of various sorts of historic heritages. For our ships, would be the shipbuilders, the workers that built them, the crew, certainly, that served aboard the ships, and just the service history of the ships themselves. So historic heritage now is told through interpretation. Oh, I didn't know that. Boy, it smells weird in here. Boy, it is hot down below. So good interpretation kind of hits all the senses. Now, for museum ships, we are lucky that for, say, touch and smell, those are automatic, right? You'll go to some parts of a museum ship, it's really hot or really cold, and most of them all have that diesel/fuel oil smell that's just baked into the steel and the aluminum and the decking. Right, so some of the interpretation is already done just by what people experience by coming on board. Now, as I mentioned, many ships already have service years. The Buffalo Naval Park does not. So it's been a joy. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's been something that I've been proud of to say, I'm going to institute service years for the ships. And then hopefully as time goes on, and now we're building a continuum of future workers, of future curators, that then this could be the baseline that then they follow. All right, and one of the best ways to interpret the historical fabric, the historical heritage, is by picking a 1 year of service. So you'll see here that USS Cass and Young, they've chosen 1958. The New Jersey chose circa around 92, 93. USS Kidd, a little more specific than a service year, is August of 45. USS Cobia is also down to a month, July or August of 45. And the USS Cod, this surprised me a little bit, but their service year for interpretation is 1953. But what about our vessels here at the Buffalo Naval Park? Ideally, our museum would have great documentation for the service year chosen. That may or may not be the case here at the Buffalo Naval Park. While I have processed thousands of items, there are thousands of more items that I haven't processed yet. And so there are gaps in our collections of the 3 ships. All right, ones that I hope to fill in as I continue processing records and donations. What I ultimately ended up with is what actions took place that encapsulate or can explain the Cold War, and then try and find a service year around that specific to our 3 ships. All right. As we'll see, for our vessels, the service histories are not really World War II, and their configurations are not World War II either. And so we'll see that now. So for the Sullivans, she had a career that spanned 21 years and 9 months. 17 months of those were in combat in the Pacific. From 1946 to 51, she was in reserve. She spent 4 months in Korea in 52, 53 and traveling, doing a round-the-world cruise. From 53 to 59, she was deployed to either the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. From 60 to 63, now she shifts down in the southern Atlantic, the Caribbean, and Cuba as part of a destroyer school training officers. And then in 64, 65, she's part of the Naval Reserve Force and is a school ship up in New York City. So you'll see that, my word, if you're looking at 21 years and 9 months, 17 months of that, so you're looking at, 20 years where her service is not World War II. And her configurations show that. All right, so in general, reviewing the refits, my biggest question is the Mark 32 torpedo. All right, the triple torpedoes, ASW torpedoes there, port and starboard. The torpedoes and the tubes themselves for ship use were introduced in 1960. I don't really have that information. 1961, maybe then that the Fletchers still in active service got them. Was that around the time the aft Mark 15 quintuple torpedo tube was removed? All right, so that's one of my largest questions that I do have for the Sullivans. If you've been following our refit videos here that I've been doing, we're accounting for pretty much everything else. All right, but you'll see there's a lot more changes. So what do we have on board? We have the 4 5-inch 38s. My gosh, what was Mound 53 has been removed around 1954 when the 3-inch 50s were added. As I just mentioned, we have 2 Mark 32 torpedo tubes added, question mark, question mark. We do have 4 twin Oerlikons. Those were added after we arrived in 1977. We have 1 K-gun on board, added after 1977. We have 2 of the 7.2-inch Hedgehogs. Those were added in 1952, right before the Korean service. And then we have the 240 millimeters on the 01 level, port and starboard, where the other 3-inch 50s would go, and those were added after 1977 as well. So you see, we're kind of a mishmash. If I've talked about it, or if you check museum ships on Facebook, about 2 weeks ago, I did put out the call. I am looking for 2 twin 3-inch 50s. All right, I would like to remove the twin Beauforts that were added at some point while the ship was here, and add again the 3-inch 50s. We have the one on the aft superstructure, all right, but we don't have the 2 the waist mounted 3-inch 50s. I would like to do that because the year that I have picked for our service history is 1962. And I'll give a brief overview towards the end when I review the Croaker and the Little Rock as well. So for the Croaker, her career spanned 20 years. Again, about 17 months of those 20 years were in combat in the Pacific, doing her duty, sinking 11 Japanese vessels, about 20,000 tons. All right, from 46 to 51, she was in reserve. 51 to 53, she was converted. All right, so into a hunter-killer conversion, not guppy. All right, from 53 to 59, she was in her duties included hunter-killer, her duties as a hunter-killer sub. Right, and what really that meant was sitting in the North Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and actively and passively listening to the Russian merchant fleet capital ships, submarines as they went by, and then keeping a record of those and passing them up the chain. By 1959, though, what they did was they took the SSKs and they converted them back to SSs, still in their SSK configuration, but now they said you are going to do general submarine duties. By 1959, the technology for the Russian fleet had changed enough to where our boats weren't able to really adapt, and they wouldn't be able to hunt down a Russian submarine, to track it or to engage with it. So they took the SSKs, converted them back to SSs, and then put them on general scouting duty. In 1967, she went to an AGSS, an auxiliary general submarine, and she became an ASW trainer for officers and enlisted. She was then taken out of commission in 68, and from 68 to 71, she became a pierside ASW trainer. The officers and crew would go on board. They wouldn't go anywhere, but they would learn the equipment. So everything about our boat, USS Croaker, shows 1953 and after. All right, the subsail's 53, the removal of the one engine is 53, the BQR-4 sonar in the bow, and the loss of the 1 and 2 torpedo tubes, 1953. The sonar room placement, right, taking it out of the forward torpedo room and moving it down below where the pump room was. All right, the pump room is still there, but they moved then equipment to the engine room and other spaces down below. Updated antenna, periscope, and air search capabilities in 53, and then the snorkel in 1954. So for the year for Croaker, I've picked 1959. Now for the USS Little Rock. Again, this career spans about 20 years. Constructed right at the end of World War II. Didn't see any action, just was in service during that war period for about 4 months, if you're including September into early October. From 45 to 49, she traveled to South America, was deployed in the Atlantic, was deployed in the Caribbean. Then in 49 to 57 was in reserve, came back in 57, converted in 1960 to a CLG. And then for those 16 years, all right, 60 to 76, 6th Fleet and 2nd Fleet flagship. So for this 3-year overhaul, it was about $14 million at that time, which would be about still relatively cheaply $140 million in today's money. They added 110 miles of new cabling. 70 draftsmen were dedicated to this work to convert her. The way she looks now, just with some minor cosmetic changes, she looks almost identical to the way she did at decommissioning. We do have a lot of photographic and ship history information that is lacking a little bit. There are gaps with Croaker and Sullivans. But this, you can almost map it out, her whole service history. So I've picked 1975 for the USS Little Rock. So we're looking at 1962, 1959, and 1975. So again, if you go back to one of those early slides, what events encapsulate the Cold War and this particular ship or boat service within it? And so for the reasoning of these years, for the Sullivans, I picked 1962 because they participated in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the blockade. All right, for the Sullivans, is there a better story that encapsulates or tells the story of the Cold War better than the Cuban Missile Crisis? So that's why that year was chosen for the Sullivans. In 1959, for the Croaker, her ending of true hunter-killer duties, that is because Russia had advanced beyond our submarine configuration. And so that tells a lot of the Cold War and the buildup of new platforms and using new technologies. So even though she was still in service for many years after that, I felt 1959, where they actually can reclassify her as an SS, not an SSK, marks a turning point in the Cold War. And then, of course, we're building boats with nuclear energy, and so there's a blossoming of that technology. For the Little Rock, I chose 1975. It's the reopening of the Suez Canal, which had been closed for 8 or 9 years up to that point. All right, during the Israeli conflict, I think it was believed the Israeli-Egypt conflict in 67. 67. The Suez Canal was mined. They would throw junk in there, all right, to keep it from being passable. All right, they would intentionally sink craft. And so the USS Little Rock was instrumental in, I believe, the only American ship to oversee the work to help clear out all of the debris from the Suez Canal. And she was the first vessel allowed to pass through it in 1975 when she was reopened. So 1975 is a great year to again talk about the Cold War, and not just Russia and America, but our proxies, either Egypt, Syria, even though they were kind of beginning to pull away from communism at that time. All right. But for the Little Rock, that really encapsulates it. Of course, there might be talk about the USS Liberty incident. All right. There's so much more of her history after that, and so many internal changes to the USS Little Rock. I didn't think that would be the right year, because that would then mean that we are showing things on board and configurations of the inside of the vessel that still had many years of life left. So in 67, that was a thought, but pondering it a little bit more and doing a little more research, I said, I can't use 67 if the ship was in service until 76. So I went with 75, again, the closest configuration. You know, they would do little things like have a band room and then take it away, and then put in a tailor shop and then take it away. And, you know, the post office got moved and the cruise lounges got moved. So if we can get it to where as close to decommissioning as possible, that's what I was looking for. And what a better way of then wrapping up the Navy's, one of the Navy's primary duties is to secure shipping lanes and to see that our American interests are protected. Opening of the Suez Canal in 75 brings back that shipping, brings some stability to that region. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look into the service years. If you have questions, comments, please feel free to put them in the comments. Like and subscribe. And again, this is a fun. This was a fun process to decide that, which are the years, and now we can start to build around that using the preservation standards by the Department of Interior, and start crafting each of our vessels towards those years. Hey, if you want to help, if you have ideas, suggestions, thoughts, please feel free to give them. And again, we will see you again tomorrow. Thanks so much for your support. Take care.